campers or rangers of Reddit, what's the most unsettling, creepy, and or supernatural thing that's happened to you while in the woods? Went hiking with a good buddy of mine in the Carolina mountains in the middle of winter. We went way off trail, doing a full day's walk from where we'd parked. So by the time we set up camp we were miles away from the nearest human. We pitch our tent and cook ourselves some food and we're passing the whiskey flask back and forth enjoying the near pitch black night and the stillness and our little fire. At first we felt it, that sudden sensation of being not alone. Then after a few seconds we heard something move in the darkness. We're frozen. We hear it again, but the most terrifying thing is that this time, we realize whatever is out there, there's more than one of them, and they're big. My buddy and I lock eyes, too afraid to make any noise yet, and come to a silent agreement that scaring these things off is our best chance. He grabs a thick branch from the fire, and I grab one of the rocks we'd placed in a circle around it. I'm so scared I can barely breathe, but together we yell as loudly as we possibly can and charge into the darkness. And then we saw the eyes, a dozen pairs at least, staring right back at us. We had charged a ferocious pack of mountain ponies, who didn't react at all to the two crazy men yelling at the top of their lungs in the middle of the night, just stared back at us, totally unimpressed. Mother-tricking ponies. My family used to camp in Algonquin Park in Ontario when I was a kid. We used to do a lot of the day hikes with our dog. The dog was a crazy runner and would run up and down the trail, back and forth between my parents and my brother and me. This one trail ended at a lookout. My brother and I stopped to take in the view, and my dog arrived. Seconds later, traveling at full speed. He attempted to apply the brakes, but the momentum carried him right over the edge. We freaked out. Our dog had just gone over a cliff, and it was a good 50 or 60 foot drop. I ventured over to the edge to look. My dog had somehow landed on the one ledge that sat about 10 feet down. Crap, now what? Any movement, and my dog would fall the rest of the way down. It was a sheer face, and no way to get down. Out of the blue, from the trail behind, appears a hiker with full climbing gear. Algonquin is not an area known for a lot of climbing. I've never seen anyone before or since with gear on that trail. This guy belayed down, rescued my dog, packed up and left. He didn't even stick around long enough to get his name. To all intents and purposes, he just returned to the trail and vanished. You have the mysterious stranger perk from Fallout. When I was about 18, me and some friends took a road trip about 7 hours or so down to the Apalachicola National Forest near Tallahassee, FL. We were going to do a little car camping, drink a few ice cold natty lights, 18-year-old stuff. As such, we didn't want to be bothered by any park rangers, so we drove wire deep into the woods. Got there, set up camp, had said natty lights, and me and a guy decided to go do a little exploring. So we walked about 100 yards from our site back to the main road, saw another path directly across from us, and started walking. Immediately we started seeing signs that someone had lived there for a while. Big bags of trash, stuff like that. Should have been a huge red flag to turn around. But 18. Nothing could hurt us. So we get to this campsite of an older white guy living out of his van. Clotheslines strung up, coolers places around it, and a big gorgeous dog. I think maybe a golden retriever. We tried to back out, but he sees us and starts talking. He's friendly enough, asks us where we're from, tells us about some cool spots to check out in the park. We end up chatting for 10 minutes and going on our way. I kept thinking to myself how it was that he gave directions in steps, not yards or miles. Guy always seemed to be off balance, not stumbling drunk, but like he was walking on a balance beam, swaying side to side. Oh, and he was super excited to talk about national parks and forests where we were from. Okay, camping part over. We went back to our tents. Fast forward 2 months. Same buddy calls me late at night and tells me to turn on TV to the news. I oblige. I see an old dude with a van. You see where this is headed, but I didn't. So I get pissed at my friend for waking me up. No, watch. And then I see the golden retriever and it all clicks. What the frick? That man's name was Gary Michael Hilton. Convicted of at least 4 murders. He kidnapped and murdered a girl on Blood MTNGA, an older couple in the Pisgah NC, and a girl in the Apalachicola at that campsite not long after we left. Yes, The very same places he had been talking to us about. Obviously we call the cops. They put us in touch with the FBI. F is for Florida, and we get flown down to take investigators to the campsite, point out every spot we saw anything, tell them exactly what he told us, and show them the places he described to us. I didn't find out until after the trial, but apparently they found what appeared to be partially destroyed human finger bones in an area near the site. Had to fly down again to testify. Just goes to show, even serial killers can be nice guys. Real talk though, that's creepy as frick. He probably didn't try to kill you guys because you would have overpowered him easily. If you were a lone older female you would probably be dead. One more story. I was camping in the Florida Keys one winter. I managed to survive the large snakes and even larger alligators as well as the scorpions which would get in my shoes at night, but one experience I will never forget. My campsite was next to an old rock quarry which had filled with water and made a good place for swimming and getting water from. There was also an old dump site close to this quarry with piles of stoves and fridges and other junk. It had been there for a while but nothing new had been added to it for a long time. One day a fellow shows up and tells me that they were going to clean up the dump and burn some of the junk, so I better move my tent. So I gathered up all of my belongings and moved a few hundred yards back into the woods. That day they started burning the garbage and I thought nothing about it until I climbed into my tent at night. As soon as it got dark and I was falling asleep, my tent became covered with hundreds of rats. I guess they had moved out of the dump because of the fire and were just wandering around looking for food. They were everywhere, climbing up my ropes and over the top of the tent. I shook as many as I could off and started a fire and stayed up all night hoping they wouldn't return. They seemed to be gone, so the next night I stayed in the same place thinking they had moved on to another dump or something, but no. Again as it got dark they all returned bringing some of their friends, as it seemed there was more than ever now. I again shook them off the tent and got a fire going. When the morning came I packed up my tent and headed for a new place far from those rats. As I was walking down the highway wondering if I should return to another camping spot where I had been previously, there on the highway near to that place was a dead 11-foot alligator which had crawled out from the mangroves only a few feet from where I had been camping a few weeks previously. I decided my Florida camping adventure had gone on long enough and headed back home. Archaeologist here. A few years back we were doing a massive survey in the middle of nowhere in the interior of BC. All the crew had gone home and it was just my boss and myself left for a few days to follow up and confirm some coordinates and finish some mapping. We head out from the motel an hour or so into the bush, middle of nowhere along deactivated logging roads. Closest town is miles and miles away. We hike out to this one area we had found a site a few weeks previously. For some reason the whole area just felt off. So, we get down to business and about 15 minutes after being hunched over mapping, there is this weird deafening whomp sound. Like, I could feel pressure in my ears. I immediately looked at my boss about 20 feet away and he is white as a ghost staring back at me. Standing, it freaking happens again, whomp, ear pressure and chest pressure like I was just squeezed. Chills all over my body and every hair is standing on end. My boss just looks at me and says, "Let's go." We grab all of our crap and speed hike back to the truck. We never discussed it. No clue what it was, but I have never been so freaked out in my life. 10 years later, I still get the chills. I grew up in the central interior of BC. I hate to say it, but it sounds like it might have been a grouse. Those dumb road chickens. They can do some weird crap with their wings against their chest that make that whomp sound. It feels like a helicopter is in your chest. Bass that you've never felt before. It'll go right through your body, and they're so dumb you can kill them with a stick. When I was young, from age 5-11, my dad lived in an old log cabin about 15 miles west of Sheridan, WY, in the foothills of the Bighorn Mountains. Every summer when I was visiting we would go up into the mountains backpacking and fishing for 2 days every weekend. We would park the truck, hike into a remote area fishing for trout along the way and make camp wherever we ended up. We encountered a number of strange, creepy things and got into some scary situations with wildlife, but the one that sticks with me the most was an ancient abandoned camp we found. We were hiking down a very steep slope to get to an area of a creek that had been dammed up by beavers, hoping to catch some big trout. I had climbed out on a rock ledge and was looking for a way down when I saw the stock and action of an old rusty rifle sticking out of a tree. Where the tree had grown around the barrel years before, about 10 feet above the ground. Dad and I climbed down to check it out and we found a small cave at the base of the rock formation, only about 12 feet deep, which would make a nice natural shelter but a really terrible place to set up a long-term camp. Inside we found a bunch of really old stuff, 3 heavy gauge unopened cans of food, an old cast iron pot that had holes rusted all the way through it, a crusty old saddle and bridle set, and a very deteriorated heavy wool blanket rolled up and tied with a leather belt. When we unwrapped the blanket we found several personal items including a rusty old cap and ball black powder revolver, a leather satchel with lead pistol shot, a powder horn with no black powder in it, tarnished old cartridges, presumably for the rifle in the tree, a straight razor, and most unsettling was a shirt with holes in it and over half of it stained with dried blood. As we stood there thinking about what all of this meant, it occurred to me how remote this place was even at that time. It was July of 1985, and the fact that whoever owned that shirt had been very seriously injured. Stuck on a steep slope in the middle of absolutely nowhere, I got serious chills down my spine. The only thing that somewhat dated this fateful campsite was the pistol and the rifle, both of which were made sometime in the 1870s according to my father. There's no way to ever know what happened to the man who owned all this stuff, but the fact that he or someone he knew was obviously shot twice with either a gun or arrows and all his belongings were sitting right where he left them possibly 100 years later, it was highly unlikely he left that area alive. Discovering what amounts to a 100-year-old crime scene in the very remote wilderness kinda gave me the creeps. But mostly, it just made me sad to know how hopeless and alone this guy must have felt when he died. Just a few weeks ago we were on a road trip from BC to San Diego and we came upon a campsite just outside of Crescent City, California. We drove through. One side of the campground was relatively empty. I noticed a few scattered tents but nobody close to the location we ended up picking. We had tons of space. We wanted an early night so I started a fire while my girlfriend started cooking. We ate, had a few beers, and climbed up to our rooftop tent. Tepu, with our dog by 9 PM or so. I had a rough time sleeping and woke up a few times but finally fell into a decent sleep. In the pitch dark with all of our tent windows and canvases closed, I was awoken at 1 AM by someone whistling outside of our tent the tune of When the Saints Come Marching In. After a few minutes of this repetitive whistling I nudged my girlfriend who awoke and was obviously freaked out as well. The whistling then turned to chanting things like when you sleep here you disrespect me, and when you disrespect me you disrespect the US Marines. The person would then start spelling out words like FLEE. The verbiage and tone kept getting more aggressive so we decided we had to make a move. I slowly unzipped the tent while our guard dog was snoring and got my head out of the tent. I took a few seconds to let my eyes adjust and figure out where the person was. I felt more confident once I could somewhat see and hear, so I climbed down and the girlfriend passed me the dog and she climbed down too. We flipped the tent up without securing it and we jumped into a truck while the person was still whistling to a motel in Crescent City. The next morning we drove back to get the few belongings that weren't in the truck, and a family who had been camping a few sites over said it went on for another 2-3 hours and it was the scariest thing their family had ever experienced. My dad was up camping in Canada. He was sleeping naked in his tent in a patch of woods near some train tracks. A bear cub came rustling up and messing with the tent. My dad, who had long hair and a beard at the time, grabs a long Bowie knife and runs outside the tent. Notices the bear cub. Where bear cubbies, mama bear is nearby. He backs up near the train tracks just as an early morning freight train comes by. He could see the engineer looking at him in horror, thinking this long-haired bearded hippie with a big knife was gonna try to hijack the train. He got a visit from the Mounties later that day inquiring on if he had seen any angry hippies with weapons around. He was sleeping naked in his tent. Well, there is his first mistake. You should always plan for if you need to bail out of the tent. Since my army days I have always slept with a fresh pair of socks on and my pants buried in the bottom of my sleeping bag so they are easily accessible. Buddy and I were hiking at dawn during a camping trip. Walking along a path and I hear a zing like a bird chirp by my ear. A second or so later a tree kind of pops next to my buddy. It's at this point we realized there was an accompanying crack and we'd been shot at. We informed the park ranger around noon. He ended up finding an old guy hunting illegally. Not sure if he was charged with anything. This pirate hamster is here to steal all of your cheese. Subscribe in 2.15 seconds or he'll do it. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.